There are people who spend their whole lives chasing happiness, in fame, in fortune, in the spotlight of success. But then one day they realize what they were searching for was never out there to begin with. This is the story of a woman who once stood at the peak of power, but chose to disappear into the quiet of the mountains, just to rediscover something simple, a genuine smile, one that comes from within. And it was there, amid the forest winds, the morning mist, the silent footsteps winding through mountain passes, that she became a quiet light, guiding the lost through a world that had grown far too loud. If you've ever felt tired from chasing something bigger, maybe it's time to pause, because maybe, just maybe, in the stillness of this story, you'll find a piece of yourself too. Nak used to be a name that commanded deep respect in the business world. She was one of the first female entrepreneurs to found and lead a tech corporation to international heights. Under the spotlight, people saw a woman who was powerful, confident, radiant in every step she took. In the media, she was a symbol of intellect and courage. In the boardroom, she was known as the Iron Lady. Nothing was impossible. She had it all: wealth, fame, power, status, and the admiration of thousands of young people. But then, time began to knock quietly at her door. Sleepless nights from billion-dollar deals left her body slowly drained. And one day, after falling seriously ill, she found herself lying on a sterile white hospital bed, staring at the blurry ceiling lights. For the first time in her life, she felt small and strangely alone. That's when she realized, all these years, she had been living like a machine of performance, of expectations, of responsibility. Each morning, she woke up to go to war. Each night, she went to sleep only to prepare for the next battle. Everyone who came to her came to ask, to plead, to wait for her decision. But no one ever asked, "Are you happy?" And the truth was, she hadn't known what happiness felt like in a very, very long time. So after that illness, she did something no one expected. Nak resigned. She sold all her shares, cleared out her office, and left behind a long handwritten letter to her staff. Not to explain, but simply to wish them a life fully lived. Not just a life of success. She vanished from the glittering city. No one knew where she went. No social media, no phone, no news outlet could trace the whereabouts of the once mighty businesswoman. But in truth, she had simply stepped into another life. A life no one had anticipated, but the only one her heart had longed for all along. She returned to the mountains, to the forest, to the wind. No more suits, no more penthouse views, no more cold boardrooms. Just a small wooden cabin tucked beside a winding mountain pass. She lived like a guardian of the hills, sweeping fallen leaves, cooking simple meals, helping travelers when they needed, and sitting in silent meditation as the sun dipped below the peaks each evening. One day, someone asked her, "From CEO to mountain keeper, don't you regret it?" She just smiled, a gentle smile like the early morning sun, because she knew, from the very moment she let it all go, her real life had finally begun. Nak's new life came as gently as the first breeze of autumn. No more blaring alarms. No more suffocating schedules packed with meetings. No more midnight phone calls to handle some looming crisis. Now, she woke with the first light of day, as the sun gently rose over the mountain slopes. The only sounds to stir her from sleep were birdsong, the soft gurgle of a nearby stream, and sometimes the whisper of wind brushing through trees, turning golden. She began each day with slow, steady steps along the winding trail that hugged the mountainside. Feet that once climbed to the summits of power now moved over earth and stone, lighter than ever. Sometimes she would sit for hours on a mossy rock, simply watching a cluster of wildflowers bloom in the forest shade. One day, she found herself moved to tears at the sight of a highland child, eyes bright and pure, carrying a bundle of firewood twice their size, still smiling like sunlight breaking through clouds. Nak began to understand. Peace had never lived in the grand and glorious. It was in the little things she once overlooked. The patter of rain on her roof at dusk, A warm bowl of rice and sesame salt that tasted like a royal feast. The soft steam of her breath on misty mornings. The feeling that she no longer had to prove anything. That just being here, just being, was enough. And so, she began to meditate. Not the kind of meditation she once practiced to optimize productivity in her corporate days, but the kind that taught her how to listen inward, to each thought, each scar, each memory long buried beneath contracts and keynote speeches. Through stillness, she let go. Bit by bit, she released all that no longer belonged to her. The fame, the wealth, the ego, the fears, the regrets. All of it melted away in silence. And in that emptiness, she found fullness. No longer a CEO, no longer a legend of the business world. Now, Nak was simply a woman, living quietly in the forest. And never before had she felt so truly rich. Rich because she needed little and felt full. Rich because her mind was calm and her heart untroubled. Rich because she had finally touched what so many spend a lifetime chasing. Peace. Time passed, but there was one thing on Nak's face that never faded. Her smile. Not the practiced smile of a boardroom executive. Not the polite smile meant to please others. But a real smile. One born from a soul that had let go of all the burdens of the world. Gentle, peaceful, soft as the golden light spilling across a mountainside at dusk. Every time someone happened to pass the winding mountain road, whether a local or a weary traveler, they couldn't help but be drawn to her. A slender figure in a plain brown robe, silver hair tied neatly atop her head, sweeping leaves from her porch or tending to her small garden beds. But when she looked up, when her warm eyes met theirs, and she smiled, it was as if every heaviness in their hearts quietly melted away. Some wept without knowing why, just because she looked at them and smiled. One young man said, "I was on the verge of giving up everything. Life felt so pointless. But as I walked this path and saw her, just sitting in the forest smiling at me, I felt like I'd been saved." A mother, resting nearby as she carried her sick child to a rural clinic, asked Nak, "How can you live alone up here and still smile like that?" Nak simply smiled, gently, like a breeze brushing through pine needles. Because there's nothing left to be sad about. The villagers began calling her the keeper of the mountain smile. Children lovingly called her Grandma Nak. And whenever someone in town felt broken, they would make their way to that little cabin by the pass. Not to ask for money, not even for advice, just to sit there, sometimes without a single word. All they needed was her quiet presence, and that smile, always waiting. One day, a tourist asked her outright, "Living like this, don't you ever feel like your life has no meaning?" Nak smiled, but this time her eyes sparkled, as if they held the entire sky at twilight. "There was a time," she said, "when I lived among the crowds and felt utterly lost. Now I live alone and feel completely full." Happiness isn't about doing something grand. It's when you don't have to do anything and still feel at peace. And maybe, just maybe, that's what made her shine more brightly than ever before. No more glory, no more stage lights, but in those eyes, in that smile, there was a light nothing could dim. On the mist-covered slope of the mountain pass, Nak's little wooden hut quietly became a familiar stop, not just for locals, but for wandering travelers as well. There were no signs pointing the way, no maps, no promotions, and yet, those who stumbled upon her cabin never forgot it. They would return home and whisper to others, "If you ever feel lost in life, go see her, just once." No one in the village saw her as a stranger anymore, though she wasn't born there. The love she gave to the land and the warmth she offered everyone made her feel like the very soul of the mountains. Sometimes she helped an elderly man carry firewood. Sometimes she simply sat beside someone's sickbed, gently stirring a pot of rice porridge without saying a word. She was never loud, never dramatic. She just showed up, and in doing so, she became known as the heart of the pass. Wherever she was, people felt their burdens ease, as if her presence alone warmed the coldest corners of the soul. Visitors began to arrive more frequently, Not for advice, not even for answers, but for something much rarer, the quiet feeling that they had come home, not to a place, but to themselves. One young woman once said, "I was drowning in depression, but as I sat next to her, she spoke of flowers blooming, and it felt like she was speaking to my heart. Somehow, I wanted to live again." Another man, a burned-out CEO hiding from a collapsing career, broke into tears when Knock handed him a bowl of warm tea, smiled gently, and said, "There's no such thing as failure, if your heart is still open." But perhaps the one who grew closest to her was a child. His name was Chloe, a 7-year-old tribal boy who wandered the mountain trails, herding buffalo for his mother. The first time he met Knock, he stood silently, watching her smile, and then smile back. From that day on, he visited her daily, sometimes to ask for a roasted sweet potato, sometimes just to sit and listen, as she told stories of faraway lands and gentle-hearted heroes. No one could calm Chloe's tears, except Knock. No one could teach him how to write, except Knock. She called him My Little Smile. He called her, without hesitation, Grandma of the Mountain. Over time, that cabin became more than a hut. It became a second home for the boy. And whenever Knock held Chloe in her arms, people would look on and see something sacred in his radiant little face and in her tender gaze, as if two souls, separated by generations, by worlds, had found one another in the heart of a forest, through the one thing that needed no explanation: love. The story of the woman with the mountain smile was never meant to spread. No press, no headlines, no grand tale told aloud. But like the scent of wildflowers carried by the breeze, it drifted gently, silently, into the hearts of those who had once met her. From the humble mountain folk to weary travelers, from lost young souls to powerful people running on empty, each one carried away a fragment of her, like a warm ember held in the palm, and passed it on in whispers. It wasn't long before those whispers reached a man at the very top, a statesman, a national figure, busy, respected, admired. He sat at the center of policy and power, but in his eyes was always a shadow, a quiet fatigue that no sleep could fix. Lately, his nights were restless, his thoughts scattered. The world called him a symbol of success, but deep down, he no longer knew what he was living for. One day, during a private meeting, his secretary, who had once stumbled upon that hidden mountain pass, spoke softly about an old woman who lived alone up in the hills, a woman who smiled with such gentleness that people felt like living again. It was said casually in passing, but something in the man's gaze paused. Just a few days later, he requested a short leave. No press release, no entourage, no government cars, just one man, dressed plainly, walking the winding road alone beneath the canopy of towering trees. For the first time in decades, he was traveling without guards, and for the first time, he felt at ease. He arrived at a small wooden hut. There she was, an old woman rinsing sweet potatoes in a mountain spring. Their eyes met. She looked up and smiled. No titles, no handshakes, no politics, no introductions. He sat beside her, not as a leader, but as a man who had lost something and didn't know how to name it. She handed him a cup of tea, said nothing of who he was, asked nothing, and as he took that first sip, his eyes filled with tears. In a voice almost breaking, he whispered, "It's been so long since I felt like a human being." Knock nodded gently and said only one thing: "People don't need to carry anything to come home, just a heart, tired enough to return. And that's enough." They sat quietly, side by side, as the wind stirred through the trees. And from that moment on, the man began a different kind of journey. Not one that led him farther, but one that brought him gently home to himself. Ever since the day that statesman left the mountains, rumors began to spread, not of scandal or power, but of change. They said he was different. He spoke less in meetings, but when he did, his words carried a quiet weight. Not sharp, but soft, measured, full of compassion. He no longer barked orders across the table. He listened, truly listened. Budget plans and profit charts were now met with unexpected questions. Will this make people happier? Will this ease their suffering, even a little? Some were surprised, others skeptical. But those who paid close attention could see. His eyes had changed, no longer restless or hard. There was a calm in them now, like the gentle light of dusk after a long storm. And as for Knock, she remained just as she always was, living quietly beneath the humble roof of her mountain hut, surrounded by trees and wind, doing the same simple things, listening, smiling, planting small seeds of presence in the hearts of those who passed by. People would ask, "Why don't you return to the city? Surely life here is too hard." Knock would simply smile and say, "Wherever there is a smile, that is home." To her, happiness had never been something to chase. It wasn't found in success, or in power, or in applause. She had once held all of that, and still, her soul had felt hollow. It wasn't until she let it all go, and sat in silence, beneath the rustling trees, with nothing to prove and no one to impress, that she discovered what it meant to finally be full. We live in a world that is always in a hurry, rushing to succeed, rushing to prove we're enough, rushing for money, rushing for love. And somewhere along the way, we rush right past ourselves. We believe happiness is a destination, a finish line to be reached. But the truth is, it's been quietly waiting for us all along. In this very breath, this very moment, in the kind of heart that's still enough to feel the small, beautiful things. Happiness doesn't come from having more. It comes from needing less. And sometimes, to find it again, we don't need to go anywhere. We just need to stop, to be still, to return, not to a place, but to ourselves, to that quiet corner of the soul we abandoned long ago in the noise of becoming. Because only when the heart stops shouting can we finally hear the soft, unmistakable voice of joy, like that old woman in the forest who owned nothing and yet had everything because she had herself. Happiness was never some far-off destination. It doesn't live in power, fame, or the applause of strangers. It lives in a single moment, when we sit still, right in the middle of life's chaos, and smile gently at ourselves. The story of the old woman on the mountain isn't just a tale of letting go. It's a quiet reminder of a way of living that's simple but powerful, that we don't need to chase happiness in the world outside, because the most precious place to search is within. And maybe, just maybe, in the midst of all the noise, all the weariness, there will come a day when you choose to walk away, not to escape, but to return to the quiet, untouched peace within your own soul.